Welcome to Game Theorem, where we have serious discussions about absurd entertainment.
The curses that have spread across our world still have to be dealt with, and you incubators have become necessary for that task. You're going to stay and help, incubator. Homura Akemi. Redacted.
Alright, we're talking about Madoka Magica again. Because we need to finish it, because there's so much happening.
Yes, we're going to talk about the second half of the story, which, honestly, I'm kind of excited about. It's a bit of a controversial thing, but Madoka Magica ends with a movie, and there's a lot of mixed feelings on it, and my opinion is if you don't like the movie, you are wrong. You didn't understand the entire point of the story, and your analysis is so surface level that change upsets you, and you are effectively a reactionary. Go cry.
Yeah, there was change, but it was really good. I liked it.
Yeah. All right, so we were going through a whole bunch of different timelines, right? Now, we're going to do this another timeline. This is the different story timeline.
Mm-hmm.
And this one is from another spin-off manga, but it's not one that tries to add characters or just go a different story or anything. It's one that tries to make another timeline and goes like, well, what if this happened?
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, so I went a bit more in detail on this one because it was actually relevant to the main plot.
Mm-hmm.
It just went into more detail.
Yeah.
Homura went back in time to when she had recovered from her heart disease.
Homura confronted Madoka directly on the first day and warned her to not become a magical girl, but she didn't elaborate. Homura decided to try a hands-off approach again, just watching from afar to make sure Madoka didn't make a contract.
Madoka didn't run into Mommy, and so Mommy continued to fight witches by herself, becoming incredibly lonely. Homura interacted briefly with the witch, who escaped to Kazumino City and fought Kyoko. It then escaped her and came back, and Kyoko tracked it down. However, this time, Homura had slightly altered the course of events just enough that Mommy happened upon Kyoko as she was fighting the witch. Mommy assisted Kyoko, thereby saving her and killing the witch.
Mommy invited Kyoko over to her place and discussed forming a team. Kyoko was hesitant at first because she and Mommy had different stances on how to deal with witches. Mommy wanted to protect people, but Kyoko was willing to let witches rampage if it meant for a bigger haul of grief seeds later.
Yeah, I remember, Mommy's, the ethical capitalist or whatever.
Yeah.
And Kyoko's just kind of like, no, I need to survive.
Yeah.
Homura told Kyubei about Valpurgisnacht, and Kyubei began telling some magical girls about her, resulting in rumors going around about the witch. Kyoko heard about the rumors and decided to prepare to fight her with Mommy, but eventually their ideological differences led to them splitting up. So if you notice, the difference in this timeline is in this timeline, Mommy and Kyoko team up. That's not a thing we've seen in other timelines.
Mm-hmm. When Charlotte the Desert Witch hatched from her grief seed, Mommy had isolated herself to cope with the loneliness. Kyubei spread rumors about the powerful witch that was left unchecked, and Kyoko assumed this meant Mommy must have died in battle. So Kyoko came to the city once again, but this time she wanted to claim it as her turf. Homura dealt with the witch.
Yep, so Mommy is sad but alive.
Mm-hmm.
Though delayed, Madoka did eventually meet Mommy, but Madoka was hesitant to make a contract. Madoka and Sayaka came along with Mommy as supportive friends while she fought witches, and eventually Sayaka made a contract to be a magical girl for the same reason she had done in Homura's third timeline.
Kyoko clashed with Mommy and Sayaka when she discovered that Mommy had not died.
Homura attempted to get all four of the girls to work together, but Kyoko and Sayaka, as well as she and Mommy, kept clashing. Madoka told Kyosuke that Sayaka had sacrificed herself to heal him, but Sayaka became distraught that Madoka had done that. She began isolating herself from the others more and more. So in this timeline, Madoka's just like, okay, you know what, if you won't confess your feelings, I'll just tell him. And that just makes her break down even more.
Yeah. Eventually, Mommy and Sayaka were fighting Elsa Maria the Shadow Witch, and Sayaka chose to numb herself to all pain to fight bloodily and painfully until she defeated the witch by herself. Immediately after the fight, she corrupted into Octavia von Secondor, the Mermaid Witch.
Mommy managed to escape her labyrinth, and she did not handle the revelation of what became of Magical Girls well. After resting, she returned to the labyrinth and ran into Kyoko, who had heard about what had happened to Sayaka from Madoka. Kyoko wanted to see if there was a way to return Sayaka to normal, but she clashed with Mommy. Mommy said she was determined to die in that labyrinth, as she was on a suicide mission. But Kyoko refused to let Mommy go in alone. They fought to the death, where Mommy killed Kyoko, or at least so she thought. Kyoko used her illusion magic to deceive Mommy into thinking she had won, and knocked her out.
Kyoko delivered Mommy to her home and returned to Octavia's labyrinth. She faced Octavia alone and lamented that the two of them could have been more than friends. She used her finishing move to kill Octavia, who in turn killed Kyoko in the same moment.
Yeah, it's honestly a really beautiful moment because you really get the feeling that, like, this isn't the way things were supposed to happen, right?
Yeah.
Like, Kyoko and Sayaka have a really interesting dynamic where I totally ship them, right? But there's so few moments where you actually see that ship in action. It's really implied and not said. It really is kind of like we're in the wrong timeline. They could have been together had things been nice, and things aren't nice.
Yeah.
Kind of like Homura and Madoka. It's almost like this entire system is meant to prevent people from loving each other because capitalism needs to atomize people in order to convince them to hand over their labor. Or something like that, you know. Madoka and Homura checked on Mommy when she regained consciousness, and Mommy and Homura lied to Madoka about what had happened to Sayaka and Kyoko. So this is a timeline where Mommy survives past Sayaka and Kyoko's death, which is not something that happens very often.
Mommy and Homura agreed to team up against Valpurgisnacht, but Mommy was depressed about having lost so many magical girls that she felt were more deserving and determined than she was. Madoka told Mommy that she would become a magical girl and help fight Valpurgisnacht, which resulted in Mommy breaking down into sobs.
Mommy's so lonely.
Yeah.
Kyubey approached Madoka with an offer, later in private, and she wished to bring Sayaka back to life. Sayaka reappeared before Madoka, though she was still a magical girl, but now both of them were. Madoka became a magical girl just as before, but her abilities were different due to the different nature of her wish. Her aesthetic was still based around love, but her magical bows and arrows had different effects.
When Valpurgisnacht appeared, the four magical girls were supposed to assemble, but Homura was surprised to see that Madoka and Sayaka arrived, but Mommy did not. Despite Madoka's reassurance, the despair of what Mommy now knew about magical girls was too much for her to bear, and Mommy had destroyed her own soul gem, killing herself. She left a suicide note to the others, hoping to one day live in a world without witches together. That's really sad.
I know. Honestly, I think Mommy is one of the most compelling characters. I mean, don't get me wrong, Homura is too. But, like, Mommy's just really tragic, you know?
Yeah.
Again, it's finding out that your entire life is a lie, and she couldn't handle it.
She never can.
Madoka, Sayaka, and Homura fought Valpurgisnacht together, but even with the three of them working together, they failed. Madoka's magic was more focused on healing this time around, and she wasn't able to be as offensively useful. When Madoka and Sayaka died, Homura resigned herself to going back in time to try again.
Yep.
Alright, so now we have the Magia Record timeline. Now this is the side story. There is a spin-off manga that's all about this like side story thing, and it's not clear about when it takes place in the universe. It seems to be its own alternate timeline. And it's really annoying because it has like tons of characters that have nothing to do with it, with the story. So it doesn't even really need to be an alternate timeline, but it is whatever anyway. It's all based off of this mobile game that was really popular, cashing in on the Madoka franchise. And the really annoying thing is there's an anime based on this. So if you watch the original Madoka Magica anime, you can also watch this side story thinking, hey, more Madoka Magica, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not nearly as good.
No, it is not.
But the really frustrating thing is that it's always like tantalizing. You always think it might get good.
But it doesn't. It just doesn't deliver on as good characters or story as the original story did.
Oh, actually, no. I think the characters are interesting. It's just
Sure.
it doesn't do much with them, and you're not invested because the timeline's just going to be reset anyway.
Yeah, it's like the characters are driving the plot in the main story. The whole reason for the main plot is that Homura wants to save Madoka.
And even if the timeline's reset, they're still going to be involved. This timeline, when it's reset, none of the characters show up again.
Yes, but also like this story feels like the plot is driving the characters. You know, the plot is just making the characters move to
where they need to be.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. It's really frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, this is the one that has the doppels and the rebellious city and the religious stuff.
Mm-hmm.
For the record, my favorite character, though, was Yachio. She was like a water-themed magical girl.
Yeah.
And she was like really like a tragic character because she was the eldest magical girl. She was like almost an adult.
Yeah.
And like had seen some crap. I got like PTSD soldier vibes from her, to be honest.
Yeah, she'd been a magical girl since she was like 12.
Yeah. All right, so Homura went back in time to when she had recovered from her heart disease.
Homura decided to instead try to recruit as many magical girls as she could to eventually fight Valpurgisnacht. She went to Kamihama City and interfered there enough to make their plan successful. The wings of the Magius began beckoning witches and magical girls alike to their city to try to grow their movement. One of the beckon girls was Iroho Tamaki, who searched for her lost sister Ui.
For the record, the main character of this side story, Iroha, is extremely bland.
Mm-hmm.
Like, has like nothing going for her, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, literally, she's just there to be like, "Where's my sister?" Move the plot forward. You know, she doesn't stand for much.
Mm-hmm.
When one of the magical girls, Alina, hijacked their movement to spread the barrier of the city to save all magical girls in the world by turning them into doppels instead of witches, she didn't care it would also end the lives of all other people. The Kamihama Magia Union of magical girls united to take them down. So yeah, okay, basically, you have the Wings of the Magius, which are basically right. Their whole point is that they're rebelling against Kyubei's system. Mm-hmm. And they've made this elaborate thing to allow them to do it. And I hate how they're constantly framed as the bad guys, when it's just like, hey, if you talk to them, they'll probably explain themselves fully.
Yeah.
But then the show goes like, oh, but one of the members, Alina, is magical girl Stalin, who tries to hijack the movement.
Yeah. When Valpurgisnacht appeared, the Kamihama Magia Union assisted Homura in defeating Valpurgisnacht.
However, Homura still wasn't able to save Madoka, and so she resigned herself to going back in time to try again.
Yep.
It's implied that the Union actually would have been successful in defeating Valpurgisnacht. Like, it was a hard fight, but it might have actually worked.
But
Homura didn't care.
Because Madoka died.
Yep, and so all of that gets erased. Woo!
Mm-hmm.
All right, next. Repeated timelines. Homura repeated the time between her recovery and Valpurgisnacht's arrival hundreds of times, failing to save Madoka each time, increasing Madoka's power each time, but she refused to give up.
However, upon failing one time, Kyubei discovered her abilities and realized what Homura must have been doing. He mocked her for her attempt to fight the system and her failure to do so. In an act of desperation, she grabbed Madoka before she could make a contract and tried to take her back in time with her.
Revenge timeline. Homura went back in time to when she had recovered from her heart disease. She couldn't bring physical objects into the past with her, but she discovered that anyone who had touched her when she traveled back had their memories come back with them. She found that Madoka remembered everything from the previous timeline. But so did Kyubei.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of that?
That's interesting. I like that. I didn't realize that that's how that worked.
Oh, yeah, I like the idea. This manga is at least exploring a hypothetical concept in an alternate timeline. That's something, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Homura and Madoka teamed up to try to save all of the magical girls, but Kyubei kept intervening to try to get Madoka to become a magical girl herself.
However, when Mommy faced Charlotte the Dessert Witch, Mommy didn't trust either Homura or Madoka, and their interference pushed her to fight it alone ahead of them. When she died, Sayaka and Kyoko teamed up as magical girls to get revenge on Homura for her part in Mommy's death. So this timeline's just like falling apart.
Yep. Homura was forced to fight all the magical girls that she once considered friends, and nothing Madoka could say would end the fighting. When Madoka died, Homura gave up on this timeline and resigned herself to going back in time to try again.
Right, so the theme here is that, like, none of them trust Homura, and so even if she could get Madoka on her side, like, they're just kind of like, Madoka, why are you betraying us to help this random girl? You know?
Yeah.
Because they don't know who she is.
Mm-hmm.
Madoka's timeline. Okay, so this is a big deal, because now we're finally getting into episode 1
of the actual main anime.
Yes, because the anime fools you into thinking Madoka's the main character, and it's actually Homura.
Yep.
So Madoka's timeline. Homura went back in time to when she had recovered from her heart disease.
Homura confronted Madoka directly on the first day and warned her not to trust any deals that promised to change her life. Homura had lost all ability to trust anyone but Madoka, and even then she felt that it was a bad idea to tell Madoka anything more than necessary. She instead tried to plant fierce doubt in her mind, and she would specifically watch Madoka from afar.
Very jaded. Without Mommy or Homura as friends, Madoka spent most of her time with Sayaka and Hitomi. However, Madoka and Sayaka eventually ran to Kyubey and Mommy while Mommy was hunting witches. Homura tried but failed to prevent the meeting by killing Kyubey, and this inadvertently led to Madoka being especially attached to Kyubey. Kyubey was happy to take advantage of that. Still, Madoka and Sayaka were enamored by the concept of magical girls, and they decided to join Mommy as supportive friends while she fought witches. Mommy was glad to not be alone for a while. So, in this timeline, like, Madoka feels like, no, poor little alien magical kitty.
Yeah.
And I think it's ironic considering who Kyubey is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like getting to know Kyubey better backfired.
Yeah. When Charlotte the Dessert Witch hatched from her grief seed, Mommy had to fight her to save Madoka and Sayaka. Homura attempted to intervene to prevent Mommy from dying, but no one trusted Homura anymore. Mommy tied Homura up and fought the witch herself, only to be devoured upon discovering how strong she was. Homura then arrived and killed Charlotte herself, saving Madoka and Sayaka.
Oh yeah, this is episode 3 when you realize this show is not a happy show. Like, Mommy, one of the main characters, gets decapitated.
In a few episodes in.
Yeah, the main timeline you see in the show is one of the worst ones where Mommy dies pretty early on.
Mm-hmm.
When Hitomi was attacked by Kirsten the Box Witch, Kyubey approached Sayaka with an offer, and Sayaka became a magical girl, making the same wish that she always did in any previous timeline where she was given the opportunity. She used her abilities to kill Kirsten and save Hitomi and Madoka.
Sayaka dedicated herself to fighting witches selflessly, just as Mommy had done, considering herself the successor to her memory. However, Kyoko heard about Mommy's death, and she came to Mitakahara City to claim it as her turf. Sayaka refused, and the two of them fought to kill each other. Fortunately, Homura intervened to stop the fighting, and she brokered peace with Kyoko.
When Kyoko approached Sayaka, they got into another fight, and Madoka threw away Sayaka's soul gem to stop them from fighting. The soul gem landed on a truck that drove away, and Sayaka's body temporarily died. Homura fetched the soul gem, and they all discovered the horrific truth that magical girls were literally not human anymore.
Mm-hmm. Sayaka confronted Kyubey about how she had been tricked into becoming a magical girl, and Kyubey responded by turning off the pain reduction of her soul gem, causing Sayaka to experience massive pain from her fight with Kyoko. After torturing her and extorting her, Sayaka understood there was no going back.
You work or else.
Yeah.
Like, Kyubey, we didn't see this in previous timelines, but I think it's presumable that Kyubey does stuff like this sometimes.
Yeah,
because this was only Kyubey and Sayaka were here. No one else saw this happen.
Yeah, Kyubey was explaining how the pain worked, and under the guise of that, he tortured Sayaka.
Right, and this is why I take issue with the idea of Kyubey not having emotions. It's an affectation, because Kyubey felt motivated to torture her. It wasn't just to demonstrate what the pain is, that's all a ruse.
Mm-hmm.
It's literally work or else. Sayaka began fighting witches and familiars to her own expense, refusing help from anyone, in a misguided attempt to follow Mommy's selfless example. Sayaka chose to numb herself to all pain to fight bloodily and painfully until she defeated Elsa Maria, the Shadow Witch, by herself.
Sayaka's soul gem began to corrupt as she continued to not take care of herself. However, Hitomi also gave her an ultimatum to admit her feelings for Kyosuke, or else she would ask him out. Sayaka, thinking of herself as an inhuman monster, refused to ask him out. She sunk into despair and asked Kyoko to come meet with her to comfort her, but it was too late. She corrupted into Octavia von Seckendorf the Mermaid Witch.
We already talked about this last episode, but the moment Sayaka corrupts is just so heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
She realizes that she threw away her life for nothing, and just, and for the record, Hitomi was kind of a butthole.
Yeah.
Like seriously, like, oh, you better ask him out by tomorrow. Like, look, I understand, like, you like him, and if Sayaka's not gonna do anything about that, I'm not against the idea of an ultimatum in theory, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the terms of that ultimatum were extremely unfair. You're giving her literally 24 hours? What if she's busy that day?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is she actually kind of was busy that day, dying.
Yep.
Madoka, Kyoko, and Homura went into the labyrinth to try to see if Sayaka could be saved, but when Octavia nearly killed them, they realized it was impossible. Kyoko asked that Homura take Madoka to safety, and she did. Kyoko faced Octavia alone and lamented the two of them could have been more than friends. She used her finishing move to kill Octavia, who in turn killed Kyoko in the same moment. Somewhere to that one timeline, they kill each other, and it's poignant because, like, this wasn't how it was supposed to be.
Yeah. Madoka, distraught, demanded answers from Kyubey, and Kyubey tried to explain the perspective of the alien civilization in the hopes of convincing Madoka to become a magical girl, saying that they treat humans far better than humans treat their livestock. Homura had managed to instill significant doubt in Madoka, which was being reinforced through the loss of her friends.
Yeah, so she's managing to withhold. It's almost like Kyubey explaining the motives makes things worse. It's also interesting because Kyubey goes on a much more detailed diatribe here than anything we've ever heard in any other timeline.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's implied that basically Kyubey's willing to go through a lot more effort to recruit Madoka because Madoka would be such a boon with energy-wise, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Kyubey's like really trying to convince her to bite.
Mm-hmm.
And the comparison to livestock is really interesting because any vegan would just be like, but it's wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, they're counting on humans being convinced of their own righteousness. Kyubey basically goes like, you eat beef, right? Do you feel bad about that? No? Okay, then you have no right to complain about how we treat you.
Yeah.
But what if you do have a problem with that?
Yeah.
Madoka asked Homura to reveal who she really was, and Homura had a breakdown, retelling her everything she had done to save her. She cried, lamenting how she could never prevent her from dying or becoming a witch, that she just wanted to be together with her. Kyubey, realizing what Homura was, told both of them about Madoka's magical potential that was entirely due to Homura's persistence. Kyubey also told Madoka about how Homura was clearly barely holding it together anymore, and that any doubt would crush her. So Homura didn't fully realize that her time traveling was making things worse in regards to Madoka's power, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Kyubey just straight up tells her, like, it's all your fault.
Yeah.
And also is like, oh, and by the way, if you have any doubt, this might all come crashing down.
Yeah.
Like, you say that right after you try to instill some doubt in her? Sure, yeah, okay.
Yep. When Valpurgisnacht appeared, Madoka headed out into the storm that began to tear the city apart. But her mother, Junko, stopped her, demanding to know where she was going. Madoka asked her mother to trust her, and Junko did. She let her go.
Honestly, Junko's a really underrated character here.
She's a really good mom.
Really good. In fact, too good.
Yeah.
Like, that was actually a moment when she should have stepped in, like, no, my daughter shouldn't go out, right? She could have single-handedly done what Homura wanted to happen, to save Madoka, you know? It's not guaranteed to have worked, but, like, it's an opportunity that was just never got to be had,
Yeah.
because that's who Madoka is, always sacrificing herself. She refuses to listen to her mother. And I don't think there's any, like, specific lesson here of, like, parents should be more harsh. I think it's just an example of how a really good parent might be lenient and a really good person might be self-sacrificial, but there is such thing as being too self-sacrificial.
Yep.
Right? Homura fought Valpurgisnacht by herself, like she had done many times before, refusing to accept her inevitable failure. When she was badly wounded, she prepared to go back in time again, but then she remembered that Madoka would just become more powerful if she did so. Homura realized that all she had done was ensure that Madoka would be a more and more powerful witch one day, and she began to fall into despair.
Seeing this, Madoka told Homura that she didn't need to worry anymore, that she had taught her what she needed to wish for. Madoka needed to save not just one person, not just her friends, not just the city, but everyone.
Homura protested, but Kyubei made an offer. Madoka wished to have the power to erase all past, present, and future witches from existence before they were even born. She became a magical girl, but this time her power was unparalleled. She became the most powerful magical girl of all, a god. Her aesthetic was still based around love, but her magical bow and arrows could one-shot all witches. And when I say that, I'm not saying any witches. I'm not saying like she can one-shot every single witch, right? No, she shoots one arrow and it kills every witch to have ever existed.
She starts with the witch that she eventually became.
Well, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
So this is interesting, and honestly, I like how Homura protests, because from Homura's perspective, this is just the same as the other timelines. You're just becoming a magical girl. You're just going to become a witch. It's, no, right? Right? But Madoka really does try to, like, find a loophole in the system. And I think that's really interesting, you know? She uses her magical potential to try to bring it to its knees.
Yep.
So let's see how well that works out for her. Wraith timeline.
When Madoka made her wish, she completely rewrote the timeline simultaneously, instantly shifting reality and remaking it into a form that did not include witches, but it was not without hard work on her part.
When the alien civilization developed their system of energy extraction from young human girls, anytime a magical girl corrupted enough, Madoka would appear to them in a dreamlike vision. One of her arrows would appear and turn into a splinter of herself, and she would purify the soul gem of the affected magical girl. The girls still died, having expended their soul gem, but now none of them would ever become witches.
From an outside perspective, the aliens considered the corruption process a failure because it just seemed that magical girls died upon corruption. However, the law of balance ensured that some negative magical reaction had to occur due to the interference of creating wishes, and this negative energy manifested in creatures that became known as wraiths. They were beings of pure magic that acted like echoes of despair and misery. Wraiths appearing, following a magical girl's corruption, became known as the law of cycles, though they never knew this referred to Madoka.
The alien civilization proceeded with the system anyway, limited as it was, and made contracts with young girls, who would become magical girls and hunt wraiths. Defeated wraiths had their essence concentrated into grief cubes, which would be used in what had been, in previous timelines, a secondary energy extraction method. Remember the hatch? In this timeline, significantly less exploitation occurred in the system. Kyubei wasn't incentivized to hide the truth about witches, because there was no truth in that specific respect to hide. So what we effectively see is like this whole thing is like a metaphor for capitalism, right?
Yeah.
Madoka manages to get enough power within the system using a loophole to basically reform it. It's like getting a really powerful like president or socialist or maybe even just a billionaire in charge that decides to use their power to try to make it fairer for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an interesting idea. And then they just keep going with it. And this is where we get into some of the more controversial territory.
Yep.
But in this timeline, Cubey, like it's less capitalism, like authoritarian, and more like it's like social democracy now. Cubey's nice to you while exploiting you.
Through the millennia, humans advanced technologically and developed their own societies, with very little of history changing despite the lack of witches, contrary to what Cubey might have said. Cubey still took credit for all of this advancement, falsely assuming that humanity's advancement would not have happened without magical girls.
Yeah, which is just kind of like the biggest middle finger, because it's like, yeah, of course time didn't change because it wasn't you.
Mm-hmm.
It was humans.
Yep.
Every time a magical girl corrupted, Madoka appeared to save her. Rumors spread about the goddess that only magical girls who were imminently about to disappear could see. She became a legendary mythical figure among the gods, though no one would be able to trace her to a specific pantheon.
Unfortunately for Madoka, the cost of her wish was her entire life. When she got to the point where she would have been born, she accelerated to after the last corruption of any magical girl into what would have been a witch, herself. She eventually corrupted into a crime-held Gretchen, the Witch of Misfortune, who would have been the most powerful witch in the entire universe, capable of ripping it asunder. However, Madoka's wish meant that she could even save herself, and so she did, preventing herself from becoming a witch.
Yep, killed herself. Madoka Kaname was never born. Her younger brother was an only child. Her mother felt incomplete, never having had the daughter she had wanted. So again, Junko, a very underrated character, ends up becoming very tragic, losing her daughter and doesn't even know it.
Yep. When Nagisa, the magical girl that would have eventually become the witch that would kill Mommy, corrupted, Monica saved her like she had every time before. However, she pitied Nagisa and decided to hold on to her soul. Since Madoka existed outside of linear time, she could have Nagisa, in her semi-witch state, assist her in her godly duties, so long as she ceased to exist upon the conclusion of her instantaneous efforts. In the meantime, Nagisa died and was spared becoming a witch.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's like a pause of time. Like she still dies in that moment, but because of how Madoka exists outside of time, that moment can last as long as you want, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because keep in mind, Madoka's already killed herself at this point.
Yeah.
Depending on if this point is a phrase that has any meaning in this context.
Yeah.
With less stress in being magical girls, Mami and Kyoko were able to work out a better partnership, with Mami inviting Kyoko to stay in Mitakihara City and team up with her to fight wraiths.
Homura, meanwhile, drifted through life after her recovery from her heart disease. She felt love for someone who didn't exist, and she didn't understand why. Without Kyubei's involvement whatsoever, she remembered that she was a magical girl from previous timelines and became one, granting her own wish to remember the one she loved. Her aesthetic was Madoka's now, based around love, and she used magical bows and arrows for weaponry. However, she had memory manipulation abilities as well now. She didn't like what she remembered, as she didn't fully understand it, so she wiped her own memories.
Yeah, the idea is basically since, she was already a time traveler, when time shifted, there was a bunch of asterisks for her,
Mm-hmm.
She retained her magical abilities, but they were altered in this alternate timeline now.
Mm-hmm.
Sayaka and Hitomi were friends, but eventually Sayaka ran into Mami and discovered what magical girls were. She made her contract with Kyubei and wished just as she had in previous timelines, for Kyosuke's sake. She then joined Mami and Kyoko as part of their team.
Sayaka really brings a new meaning to across all universes and stuff. I will still do this for you.
Yes, even if she always realizes it's a bad idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I guess it's because, she's just stubborn. There was never any timeline where you could prevent her from doing it. The only way you could really prevent her is if she just never found out it was an option.
Yeah. However, Sayaka began to corrupt as she realized that Kyosuke was drifting away from her, and Kyoko jealously lashed out at her, resulting in them getting into dangerous fights.
Wait, Kyoko jealously lashed out?
Yeah. Sayaka began not taking care of herself and pushing herself too hard in fights as an excuse to not confront her feelings for Kyosuke. When Hitomi gave her an ultimatum to admit her feelings or else, Sayaka fell into despair.
Mami, Kyoko, and Sayaka teamed up against a horde of wraiths, but an incredibly large one began consuming Sayaka's memories and emotions. Sayaka saved her friends with her finishing move, but in so doing, she corrupted and was saved by Madoka. Upon seeing Madoka, Sayaka regained her memories from the previous timeline, remembering who she was. Despite everything, she claimed that sacrificing herself to hear Kyosuke play one more time had been worth it. Madoka, pitying her, held on to Sayaka's soul just like she had done with Nagisa. Nagisa and Sayaka would be Madoka's semi-witch guards in her duty to save all magical girls throughout time. Yeah, so it's nice, and it is weird hearing Sayaka say that. You kind of get the feeling that it's like, yeah, it was worth it. I don't have a choice, so I guess I'll say that since I have to. But in reality, I don't think so.
Yeah. Right when Sayaka disappeared was the moment that Homura's memories from the previous timeline came flooding back. In addition, her magical capacity increased as she remembered her time powers. She confronted Mami and Kyoko, telling them about Madoka, but they didn't know who she was.
Homura tried talking to Kyubei about Madoka, considering they had a friendlier relationship with Kyubei in this timeline, but Kyubei didn't believe Homura. He thought she was delusional, but he humored her explanation for the law of cycles. Despite the disbelief, Kyubei signaled for the alien civilization to look further into this matter, in the hopes of breaking the law of cycles like they had broken the law of balance.
Mami, Kyoko, and Homura fought race together for a time, but one day Homura had some of her emotions consumed by a wraith. Upon doing that, it absorbed her foreign emotions from another timeline and altered itself with her time powers. This phenomenon spreaded, where wraiths gained the ability to shapeshift into individuals from the memories they consumed.
Yeah, so think of it like Homura's like a tainted sample, right? She comes from a timeline that had witches, not wraiths, right? So the wraith gets a new ability when it absorbs her memories. Mami, Kyoko, and Homura had to fight wraith versions of their loved ones, but the wraith disguised as Madoka believed she was Madoka so much that Homura vouched for her. Homura loved Madoka so much that she was torn between preserving the timeline that Madoka had sacrificed herself to make and settling for a Madoka in front of her that she could talk to and hold. Wraith Madoka herself was torn between the magical girls and her wraith kindred. She's just like, I know you're fake, but I want to believe you're real so much.
Yeah. The original Wraith had manifested the time shield that had been part of Homura's original magical girl design, and in the fight it became destroyed. However, Homura appeared within it and had a vision. She realized that Wraith was attempting to turn into a specific person from her own memory, crime-held Gretchen.
No, don't you get it? This Wraith can turn into anyone from Homura's memory, or from people's memory, right? And Homura remembers a witch version of Madoka that was the most powerful witch in the entire universe that could rip the universe apart.
Yep.
So this Wraith's like, oh, you know what? I'm going to become that one.
Yeah.
And Homura's like, oh no.
Yep.
That Wraith threatened to destroy the entire universe, and Homura began to fall into despair and corrupt. However, her corruption was different. While she had tainted the race, they had in turn tainted her. She began to turn into something that was neither witch nor wraith, and she started to grow demonic wings.
Angel Madoka, the law of cycles, descended onto Homura to save her from her corruption, as she did with all witches, but she encouraged Homura to go back and try again to preserve a timeline that was safe for all magical girls. Homura did as Madoka asked, traveling back in time to when she had first remembered Madoka's name.
Right.
I don't remember this happening.
This was in the spin-off manga that basically serves as a prequel to the movie.
Oh, I see. Okay.
It bridges the two timelines.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, so here again we see Homura broken. Do I care about Madoka as a person, or do I do what she wants? Because it feels like what she wants is so self-sacrificial. It's literally self-harm in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So Homura's like torn between do I love my friend, or do I and fight against them because I love them so much, or do I love them and obey what they want me to do,
Mm-hmm.
even if I think it's harmful to themselves. It's a hard thing, and honestly, I can relate to it
Mm-hmm.
because you kind of do that sometimes, Kira.
Okay.
Where it's just like I just watch you and I'm just like, let me help you. You obviously need help, you know?
All right.
And you're like, no, I will eat cereal for the third time in the same day.
Mm-hmm.
Kyubei's timeline.
Homura went back in time to right after Sayaka had died. She remembered everything that had happened, and now she had all of her memories back. She left to be alone, and Kyubei asked her what was wrong. Homura explained how she had come from a different timeline, and Kyubei expressed doubt at her story.
Homer couldn't bring physical objects into the past with her, but anyone who had touched her when she traveled back had their memories come back with them. Kyubei had touched Homura right before she traveled back in time, and Kyubei remembered personally witnessing the law of cycles in action. Kyubei understood what Madoka was, and understanding Madoka was necessary to undo her.
Of course, they would want to get rid of this because it doesn't give as much energy as they want.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Homer tried to be more careful this time, to avoid any race from getting the best of her, but she found it more and more difficult to hide her corruption and despair at having to live in a world without Madoka.
Meanwhile, Kyubei relayed the necessary information with alien civilization, who were unsatisfied with the current arrangement of only procuring energy through grief cubes. They did not care in the slightest that magical girls had a somewhat better arrangement under this system than the one where the law of cycles had not existed, and so they began a new program designed to isolate the law of cycles so that it could be removed from the equation, so that witches and their massive amounts of energy could be brought back.
Mm-hmm.
This is really giving me like Reagan vibes, like
Yeah.
80s stuff, where it's like think of like FDR, like all of the reforms put onto like capitalism and whatnot, right?
Yeah.
I don't think I think people that like kind of like ascribe to like social democracy as an ideology don't realize that all those corporations and the capitalist forces, they're just going to go to work immediately at trying to chip away those protections.
Yep.
I mean, look at the gig economy right now. That's
Mm-hmm.
literally that. It doesn't matter how many rights you give workers if you just reclassify people as not workers.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what Kyubei does, because Kyubei doesn't want some of the energy. Kyubei wants all of it.
Yep. When Homura began to fall too much in despair to be able to control herself, she escaped Mintakahara City and left for a desert so that none of her friends would be hurt by whatever happened to her. She thought often of seeing Madoka again when she corrupted, but she found herself in severe uncertainty with her unique condition.
Hundreds of Kyubei converged on Homura and used some magical tech to capture her soul gem. They imprisoned it within a floating barrier that they had constructed to specifically allow anyone inside, but no one could ever leave. When Homura corrupted, there was nowhere for the witch to go, and so she constructed a labyrinth inwards, creating an alternate reality in her mind.
Mm-hmm. However, Homura's friends did not give up on her. Mommy and Kyoko tracked her down and found the barrier in the desert. They entered it to try to save her. In addition, Angel Madoka descended to save Homura from being an outward witch, and she brought her eternal guards Sayaka and Nagisa with her.
So here we're seeing that basically after everything Homura has done, Homura isn't the outsider anymore. Homura has friends. She's built these connections with people that she loves or likes, and in her darkest moment, they're like, "No, we're gonna help you."
Yep.
They're gonna be there for her.
Mm-hmm.
This is also, by the way, the first time we really get to see Nagisa like pre-witch.
Yeah.
Within Homura's mind, the world was constructed as Homura imagined it to be, trying to protect herself from realizing what had happened. Her memory manipulation powers constructed the world in a way that would preserve Homura's innocence. It was a happy world with no witches nor wraiths. Instead, magical girls only simply fought nightmares, easy bad guys that could be dispatched through song, dance, and food.
The only people inside the world were Mami, Madoka, Homura, Kyoko, Sayaka, Nagisa, and Kyubei. Kyubei knew that 5 girls had entered the labyrinth, but 3 of them were not of the physical world. He watched silently, trying to analyze and figure out which one was the law of cycles.
None of the girls knew what witches nor wraiths were, and Monica was just a simple magical girl again. Since Homura didn't know almost anything about Nagisa, she had to remain in her witch form, Charlotte, but her friends just considered Charlotte a cute, friendly nightmare that they had adopted and called Bebe.
However, as Homura and her friends dispatched nightmares and saved the people in the false Mitakahara city, she began realizing that basic facts of their existence didn't add up. She had doubts, and memories started to creep back into her mind. She worked with Kyoko to discover that her hometown, Kazumino City, literally didn't exist, because Homura had never been there and couldn't recreate it in her mind.
When the world began falling apart due to Homura's realizations, Kyubei told Homura what he had been planning, trying to nudge her over into full despair. He told her to let Madoka remember and to let Madoka save her, so that Angel Madoka would appear safely within the barrier the alien civilization had constructed. If that happened, Madoka would be trapped within the barrier forever, and magical girls in the outside world would be able to become witches again. Again, they're trying to reinvent witches. I think it's just a really cool metaphor. Also, by the way, we're calling her Angel Madoka, but she's honestly known as many different things.
Yeah.
Angel Madoka, God Magica, Goddess Magica, Ultimate Madoka.
Yeah.
You get the idea. We're referring to her as Angel Madoka because it suits better with the themes that come later.
Yep. Homura staunchly refused, and she instead doubled down on despair, turning into an enormous powerful witch called Homalili. She revolted against the barrier, and her friends realized that this world had to be fake. Mami, Madoka, Kyoko, Sayaka, and Nagisa all worked together to break through the barrier, and they were successful.
Right. So basically, it's like save yourself and throw away Madoka, right? Or no. Okay, it's more like this. Kyubei says, "Hey, you'll get Madoka back, but you'll betray her dream, her mission, right? If you stop becoming a witch or become a witch or whatever." And Homer's just like, "I don't care about you. I'll become a witch if it means I can destroy you. I'm not sacrificing Madoka."
Yeah.
Back in the real world, Homura's despair spurred her to become an outward witch, not just in her mind. And so, Angel Madoka descended upon her to finally save Homura. And Kyubei's plan to contain her had failed, this time at least. She reached to save Homura, and Homura finally came to her conclusion.
She decided that Madoka was wrong. She used her corrupted powers to splice into Angel Madoka, who realized that Homura wasn't corrupted from despair, but rather from love. Homura's demonic wings grew out, and Homura splintered Angel Madoka, ripping out her original personality and body.
Homura consumed her own soul gem, reuniting her soul with her body, and she began rewriting time with her enhanced time powers as she saw fit. She claimed that if Madoka was an angel, then she would be a demon. I think this is really cool, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because the whole idea is basically Madoka did a reformist approach, and Homura has come to realize that approach is flawed. Kyubei just exploits that.
Yep.
You can't work with Kyubei, you have to oppose him. You have to control him.
Yep.
And Madoka had done this self-sacrifice, and Homer's just like, you know what? I don't care anymore. Your dream is wrong. I will destroy that, and I will save you whether you like it or not.
Yep.
I mean, it's kind of like the revolutionary dialogue to a reformist. And don't get me wrong, I don't feel like this is an inherent, like, dichotomy. Like, these are two characters that love each other, right?
Yeah.
But they have different tactics. So now we have the rebellion timeline, the final timeline of the final movie.
Homura realized that playing fair in the magical girl system was doomed to failure, and Madoka was naive for thinking she could simply make things fair with Kyubei. Homura resented Madoka's place as the law of cycles because it not only took Madoka away from Homura, but it also took Madoka away from her own family, who she claimed to have loved above all else. Homura had come to realize that Madoka was too kind, giving too much of herself to the point of continually sacrificing her own life. Homura put an end to that.
And, for the record, some people say that Homura had like a heel turn, she became evil. But I feel like those people are kind of missing the subtext of it's not like, oh, look at me, I'm evil now. It's more like, if this is what good is, then yeah, call me evil.
Mm-hmm.
If opposing your system makes me a demonic communist, so be it.
Yep.
I'll embrace that.
Yep.
And I think that, honestly, it's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But I will admit she is a little controlly over Madoka, and there is reason to be worried about that, but it's all for a good cause.
Yep.
Homura wrote a timeline that contained neither witches nor wraiths. Magical girls were given wishes, and the consequence would only make themselves known in the alien civilization itself. She did all of this and let Kyubey know it. Kyubey protested, saying that the law of balance required there to be a cost, and Homura defied him, breaking the law.
This new timeline was incredibly unstable, possibly leading to an eventual post-scarcity universe in terms of energy. Homura knew it would be a while before that came to be, and so she allowed Kyubey to continue to exist in the meantime until humanity could finally be done with him.
I really love this detail.
Mm-hmm.
Because it implies that she isn't like a delusional revolutionary.
Mm-hmm.
She is a revolutionary that understands that there needs to be a transitory period, right? Which is kind of like literally like what Marx wrote about,
Yeah.
And so the point is the existing institutions are wrong and corrupt, but you don't want to just destroy them because then people die and starve or whatever.
Yeah.
You instead control them. You repurpose them. You take away from them and you distribute them.
Yep.
And that's what she does with Kyubey. She makes him subservient.
Mm-hmm.
And keep in mind, Kyubey isn't like necessarily a person so much as a representation of like class power of the former oppressors.
Yeah.
Literally a representative for an alien civilization.
Mm-hmm.
Sayaka, as one of Madoka's guards, protested, claiming that Homura would go mad with power. Homura claimed that she had no need for power, that she only wanted change and Madoka. She was sick of playing by the rules of a rigged system. Homura erased Sayaka's and Nagisa's memories, and she stuck them back into the world with their friends. Even though they were supposed to be dead, she didn't care. So she's just breaking the rules all over the place.
Yep. Angel Madoka continued as the law of cycles, with another Madoka as a regular girl who was barely conscious of the other part of her infinite self. Demon Homura cloaked herself as relatively normal as well, and she promised to be a good friend to Madoka, even if Madoka would come to hate her should she learn the truth of what she had done.
Right, so it's not entirely clear how this timeline works. It is kind of the more like utopian / uncertain times of a revolution. We don't know what exactly is going to happen next. But what we do know is that there's two girls that like each other, that love each other. One of them's secretly a goddess. One of them's secretly an angel, right? And the other one is secretly a demon, and the one that's actually in charge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I like how Homura is like, yeah, even if you hate me, I'm fine with this. I love you so much, I will do what's right for you, even if you hate me.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I mean, I can see how that can become abusive, but I think you need to recognize that there are also non-abusive ways of doing that, right?
Yeah, she just wants Madoka to have the life that she once said that she would never give up for anything.
Right, yeah. It reminds me of having a relationship where you tell the person, like, look, I will give you a ride to the airport if you want to leave me. If you ever want to leave, fine. Even if you hate me, even if I hate you, I will honor that kind of thing. That's the kind of vibe I get from it, personally. Maybe that's my reading of it, but...
Yeah.
These were uncertain times, but in the meantime, Mami, Madoka, Homura, Kyoko, Sayaka, and Nagisa were happy.
Kyubey, though, was terrified.
Oh yeah, it's the final shot of the final scene of the final movie, and it's amazing. You see Kyubey on the ground. Remember Magical Alien Kitty?
Yeah.
his hair is standing up.
Yeah.
Whatever happened to not having emotions, Kyubey?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're scared. You're pooping your pants right now.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point. The whole
It's
point.
so satisfying, honestly.
Yeah, because Kyubey's been like pulling the strings, been like, "Oh, I'm emotionless the whole time," and then like right at the end, you see Kyubey's just like, "Oh crap, this is bad."
Yep. Yep.
And I think that's pretty cool. I think
Yeah,
it's
I like
it's
it
an
too.
interesting ending, and I also like how imperfect it is. You know, it's not utopian so much. It's very uncertain. You know,
But it's still better than what they were dealing with before.
uncertainty following oppression is a sign of hope.
Yeah. Yeah. It's still hopeful that it could be better than before.
Right. I mean, it really is because there's always the chance that like you destroy the system, you do a revolution, and things get worse, right?
Mm-hmm.
But how worse can things get, right?
Yeah.
Because by that logic, if you do nothing, well, things might get worse anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But if you destroy the system, if you try to make a new one, there exists a chance of things getting better.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, a reformist might say things can get better without destroying the system, right?
Mm-hmm.
So really, it comes down to a matter of tactics.
Yeah, it does.
And I mean, when it comes to the actual politics of reform versus revolution, my stance is the best answer is to be a pragmatic revolutionary.
Yep.
Don't do revolution just for aesthetic's sake. Don't LARP it, you know?
Yeah.
Because, for example, in the real world right now, if you did a revolution, you would probably just get murdered immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you did succeed, billions of people would starve.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a pragmatic revolution.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I don't know. If you have to work with the reformists, fine. But let's be straight up. The reformist end goal is not a solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I kind of love the dynamic here of how, like, it's kind of a dichotomy between Madoka and Homura, but they're also on the same team. They love each other.
Yeah.
Maybe Madoka is a bit more ignorant and naive, but I feel like that's mostly a result of the timeline resetting over and over again.
Yeah.
I feel like if it wasn't for that, she would love Homura just as much. Or at least, maybe no one could love just as much as Homura does, but at least a lot.
Yeah. All right. So that is Madoka Magica.
There's just so much to talk about here, but yeah, we gotta kind of cut it off.
Yeah. I really like these stories of these girls, you know, dealing with a lot of bad things and eventually, finally coming out to where they can just be happy girls and love each other and be friends. And I think that's the most important thing of all is the love they have for each other.
Absolutely. I love how like pro-love the show is. Even when it's a metaphor for capitalism or whatever, it still has love. The love is a metaphor for love. It's just powerful in itself, as it is.
Yeah, and even when that love is powerful enough to change the world, change the universe or whatever, it still says that in the end it's right. It still says that in the end it's right to love each other and to do whatever you can to help each other.
Yeah, I would argue the ending is even love that's done in an unhealthy amount is still good for being love. I think at the end of the day, between Sayaka's thing and then Homura's eventual ending, it kind of makes the statement that when you love someone, you do it not for just them returning that love onto you. You do it because you care about them innately, even when that means that you won't get it reciprocal. Because love isn't transactional the way capitalism is. Love is beyond that. It's mutual.
It's unconditional. All right, bye.
Bye.